President Osmani, I'd like to get your thoughts on this too, because Kosovo has also found itself very often in a difficult position in its relationship, of course, with Moscow itself. Their support for Belgrade, which still is angry about Kosovo gaining the independence. You talked about those friends that supported you. There are others, of course, on the other side that did not. Where has that left Kosovo? What do you think are the diplomatic means for the region? Because this is a regional conflict. Ukraine is not a neighbor of Kosovo, but it is nearby. It directly affects you. Where do you see this going as far as diplomatic efforts are concerned, and where they should be going, especially in your experience, having gained independence through international diplomacy?
Well, there's one problem that we don't have, and that is we don't have Russian supporters in Kosovo. There's practically none to be found. Despite of the fact that we're neighboring Serbia, which unfortunately, not just lately, but for quite some time has turned into a proxy state of Russia in trying to destabilize the rest of the region, you can't find any Russian influence within Kosovo. And that, of course, has helped us also fight Russian propaganda, which is immense in our region. Because historically speaking, Russia has tried to find other fertile grounds through which they can expand the conflict. And they've always seen the Western Balkans as some of that fertile ground. So we've had from time to time crisis after crisis in the region, because Russia's interest was to bring our region back to the 90s, when there were conflicts, there were wars. But with the help of our partners, we've managed to keep the peace that has been long fought and the stability in our region. But with every passing day, we see, and of course this was also confirmed by President Zelensky, that Russia is really looking at the Balkans as a place where they want to open a new front against the West. And I think one of the biggest dangers of the war is the expansion of the conflict, which is why we constantly say that what's happening in Ukraine, it's not happening just in Ukraine. And the outcome of this war is not going to be an outcome for Ukraine only. The way how this war finishes is going to set a precedent, because if it's not finished in the right way, if we're not talking about just peace, that means a horrible example for not just the Baltics, not just Moldova and Georgia, but also for the Western Balkans, because Russia is very openly saying, I'm not going to stop only with Ukraine. Russia is very transparent about their intentions. They want to expand the conflict. They want to continue with their imperialistic ambitions and bring us all back centuries. So for that reason, it's very important that when supporting peace in Ukraine, we support the kind of peace that Ukraine's pushing forward, which is, again, not just about the interest of Ukraine, but it's about supporting a world order that is based on international law, that is based on, as I said, protecting the interest of a people that is fighting and giving up their lives for their own freedom, their own independence, their territorial integrity and sovereignty, based on the international law, based on a world order for which so much has been sacrificed to build it. And I think while we need to, of course, push forward for solutions where the war will be finished as soon as possible, that needs to come together with a just peace. Because if the solution is one that rewards the aggressor, Putin is going to see this as an emboldenment. He is going to be emboldened to continue his aggression against other countries in the region, former Soviet republics, but then also in the Western Balkans. So we are affected in that way because there can be a spillover effect, which of course we have successfully so far stopped from happening. But if aggressors are emboldened, they always cause more destruction, they always cause more wars, and there is always more suffering. Just let me take you back to the 90s for a moment. In the beginning of the wars in former Yugoslavia, people were saying, Milosevic is the guy without whom peace is impossible. Well, the fact that he was continuously emboldened meant that 150,000 civilians died. Only after he was taken away did we manage to achieve peace in the Western Balkans. And of course, we do have our trouble from time to time, but there is peace in the Western Balkans. Diplomacy is prevailing in the Western Balkans. There is dialogue in the Western Balkans. Finally, you know, my kids will be the only generation in our history without a war. My grandfathers had to go through a war. My grandfathers and grandmothers had to go through a war. My parents had to go through a war. I had to go through a war. So my kids and the kids of the people that you see here today who are from Kosovo are the only ones that actually will not have to go through a war because peace is prevailing in the Western Balkans. So we should not allow Putin to get away with what he's doing, because it doesn't only affect Ukraine, it affects all of us. There can never be a Europe whole, free, and at peace, which is the dream of all of us, if we let Putin win.
Thank you. It has become extremely difficult, though, to discern, though, what would really be considered a win for Russia at this point. Because if we do enter negotiations, and there are concessions made based on what Moscow has said it's after, what win will Russia have had if, you know, by some estimates, they've lost 300,000 of their own young men so far? Is it really a win? Would they really go further than that if it means sacrificing hundreds of thousands of their own youth to fight this war? I believe you think, I was more making a statement because I believe you think they would go further.
I don't think dictators care about their own people. Milosevic also lost thousands of his soldiers. He only cared about himself. Putin lost hundreds of thousands of his soldiers. He only cares about himself. Which is why I think it's very important that this is taken into consideration. If someone believes that he will come to the peace table and accept just peace based on the number of people that he loses, I just don't think that's the right approach. Sanctions, yes, the bigger they are, the tougher they are, that might, you know, bring to long-lasting and just peace. But the fact that, of course, we need to continue helping Ukraine, but I do not, in terms of weapons and so on, and I do believe that they should be given what they need in order to bring back the territory that was unlawfully, illegally, and through occupation taken away from them. But at the same time, we need to take into account the fact that Putin does not care about his people. Otherwise, he would have never taken them into an illegal war in the first place.
But the popular support, surprisingly, for Putin is there. President Rada, President Osmani, when we talk about global diplomacy, this is a major issue right now. The United States and the UK have done this. It's affecting all of our economies, and some say it is prolonging the suffering in Gaza, that there is a genocide happening, and the global community is standing by, watching it happen, particularly out of Europe and the US. What is your position on that? Go ahead. President Osmani, you had a comment first. Go ahead.
Well, we believe that the reaction of the United States and the United Kingdom and many other partners around the world was caused after the continuous attacks of the Houthis. So the point is, I would agree with the president of Somalia that whenever a war happens in any part of the world, and sometimes even when in terms of security, it looks like it's very distant and it's not going to spill over, the economic effects are always felt all around the world. We've seen that not just with what is happening in the Red Sea right now. We've seen that with Ukraine as well. Of course, I want to applaud what President Erdogan did in terms of making sure that at least there was an agreement on grain, so that there was a flow of goods at a time when half of the world was getting the grain from Ukraine, and on the other side, of course, it's not just about grain. It was about all kinds of goods that were coming from Ukraine to Europe, to Africa, and all around the world. So for that reason, I think in times like these, when there's a lot of turmoil, there are a lot of conflicts, making sure that diplomacy focuses not just on security, but also diplomacy focuses on preventing the bad economic effect that it can have all around the world is crucial, especially on what the president of Somalia said, to make sure that it's preventive, because you always know that it comes, no matter, even if you don't see any security, I would say any fear in terms of security that the war might come to your country, you should always know that any war, no matter how far, will have its economic effect in the entire globe. And for that reason, preventing it early on is key to making sure that there is a solution that will stop people from suffering.
No one can afford to be indifferent, as much as they'd like to. Let me ask President Osmani about your personal experience. Go ahead.
Well, thank you. I would, of course, join President Radev in expressing our appreciation to President Erdogan, to Minister Fidan, as well as the people of Turkey for welcoming us in such an immense and proud way, showcasing not just the values of the people of Turkey, but also the immense role that President Erdogan and his team are playing around the world through diplomacy to achieve the sought peace. Coming from the Republic of Kosovo, obviously there's so much to say. We overcame a centuries-old occupation. We were victims of a genocidal regime for years. We were victims of war crimes and crimes against humanity. We have the highest number of children killed of any wars in former Yugoslavia. Per capita, thousands of women that were raped during the war, and of course a lot of open wounds. Despite of this great pain, we chose dialogue as the only way forward. We chose peaceful solutions as the only way forward. So I would say, even from my own personal experience, because I feel like I grew up together with the Republic of Kosovo as a country, even from my personal experience, but I would say the experience of everyone in our country, we can learn that how difficult it is to choose peace, to choose diplomacy, even during the times of war. For example, back in the 90s, when our people were victims of a genocidal regime, our leaders chose to accept a proposal, the Rambouillet Accords at that time, even though so much of it was not exactly what we asked for, but it was a peaceful solution that would end the war. And we had to say yes to that because it was opening the way for alliances, which is my very first, I would say, a point that I want to make in this panel. In times of turmoil, it's extremely important to know who stands with you. Our biggest powers, whether in the dark days or in the good days, is the power of our partnerships. If we have friends by our side, if we have a helping hand, if we have countries around the world who do not turn a blind eye on your suffering, who do not turn a blind eye on an oppressed people, who stand by you and save your lives, that is key. Which is why for decades in Kosovo, we worked in building these partnerships and alliances. Countries like Turkey, the United States, the European Union, countries like Bulgaria, who came to our rescue when we needed that help the most. The second point that we've learned throughout our young history as a country is the fact that in diplomacy, even small wins are still wins. You're not going to get everything that you need and want at once. We managed by making steps forward, sometimes really tiny steps, that many people were not happy with, but they were forward. We managed to get our long-sought freedom with the sacrifice of our people and, of course, our liberation war. We managed to get our independence. We managed to get recognitions from all around the world, with the vast majority of United Nations members recognizing our freedom and independence, including the countries that are sitting with us today, and standing with the people of Kosovo, understanding our sacrifice after centuries-long occupation, and making sure, as my third point, that support is not just a one-time thing. Now, we see many conflicts around the world where the international community intervenes once, helps once, but then they leave you by yourself in the peace-building and state-building process. In Kosovo, it was different. In the past 25 years that I've been involved in the institutions, I've seen the international community help Kosovo from getting its freedom to a peace-building process initially. We've had the highest and the biggest United Nations mission in the history of the UN, present in Kosovo, administering our country for almost a decade, then helping us through a state-building process, which is different from the peace-building process, so that powers can be transferred from the United Nations to Kosovo institutions after independence, and now helping us in the third stage, which I believe can be called democracy-building process. Right now, Kosovo is the biggest shining example of democracy in the region in all international indexes on rule of law, on human rights, and so on, because our friends never left our side. So they are still with us. We still receive the support of the international community, whether when we're facing a pandemic crisis like we did, an economic crisis or energy crisis like we did when I went to President Radev and asked for his help, or other friends around the region. It's about building alliances that are based on values. And in that sense, as president, I've learned that the geographical distance doesn't matter. When this bond is created based on values, it doesn't matter what's the sheer distance between us. We can create connections and friendships with leaders, with countries around the world who will be there for us when we need them the most, if they are based in these values. And I would say the case of Kosovo is really a testament to what democracies, to what countries that stand for these values can achieve when they stand together against tyranny in defense of freedom and democracy. And I look forward, of course, to continuing to working with leaders around the world in making sure that we showcase this good example of how diplomacy alongside direct intervention from the international community helped a nation, helped the case of Kosovo thrive, so that today, not just the people of Kosovo, but also the friends and partners that stood by us can be proud of our achievements and can talk about Kosovo as a success story. And I think as we face the turmoil around the world, as we face horrendous conflicts where, as in every other conflict, it is the innocent that are suffering the most. It is the children, the women, and the innocent people, innocent civilians that are suffering the most. The example of Kosovo, where nations around the world did not turn a blind eye, but came to our help, is the example that should be sought, that should be put forward, so that all of us can put humanity beforehand, everything else, and make sure that we help those that are in need. We are ready to give back. From an importer of stability, we now became an exporter of stability, and our soldiers are serving shoulder to shoulder with other nations in NATO in peacekeeping missions around the world. And these soldiers, they were little kids. When we received Turkish soldiers, Bulgarian soldiers, US, UK soldiers coming to our rescue and coming into Kosovo. So we are ready to give back.
It is, bravo, actually. It is a stunning example. I hope it doesn't remain unique and that it is the example set has followed, but it really does highlight how important it is to be pragmatic when it comes to diplomacy, but how difficult that can sometimes be, especially when there's a particularly traumatic history. And people, when populations in particular don't want to let go of that history, but leaders know that in some cases they're going to have to in order to move forward for the greater good. Thank you so much for that.